The Cherokee Nation is comprised of people working hard, raising their families, and struggling to preserve a cultural heritage that's rich in history and united by a common ancestry. Like all other Indian tribes in the United States, the Cherokee have the right to grant citizenship to individuals with at least one Indian ancestor. A group of non-Indian descendants of freedmen, whose ancestors may have been former slaves of Cherokee citizens, are demanding to be granted citizenship as well. The issue is currently being considered in both tribal and federal courts. The Freedman controversy has generated a great deal of misinformation and outright lies. Some are saying that the Cherokee Nation has expelled all individuals of African American descent and therefore is racist. Others are saying the Cherokee Nation has violated the Treaty of 1866. And some members of Congress are using these falsehoods to justify legislation that would terminate the Cherokee Nation, casting it aside, and cutting off necessary funding for its neediest residents. Threats of termination by Congress set a dangerous precedent. Please consider the facts, understand the controversy, and let the courts decide.
The truth is, of all the Native American tribes in the United States, the Cherokee Nation is the most diverse and includes thousands of citizens of African American descent and many other nationalities. To be a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, a person need only have documented proof of just one Indian ancestor listed on the Dawes Rolls, an official census taken in 1906 by the U.S. government.
Regardless of appearance, color, or race, if a person has just one Indian ancestor on the federally authorized Dawes Rolls, he or she is granted Cherokee Nation citizenship. If a person does not have an Indian ancestor on the Dawes Rolls, he or she is not eligible for Cherokee Nation citizenship. Simply put, if you are an Indian, you are a citizen, no matter what you look like. And if you are not an Indian, you are not a citizen.
The Cherokee Nation is not violating the Treaty of 1866. The truth is, the treaty never promised citizenship to non-Indian freedmen. And the rights given non-Indian freedmen were taken away by Congress more than 100 years ago through federal legislation. This is not a new issue. Federal courts have ruled on the status of non-Indian freedmen descendants several times, creating clear legal precedents which the Cherokee Nation follows. And yet some in Congress are proposing legislation to punish the Cherokee Nation and its citizens for following the law.
Over the past 100 years, federal courts have repeatedly supported the Cherokee Nation's right to decide its own citizenship requirements. As recently as 20 years ago, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in Nero v. Cherokee Nation that Cherokees could determine their own citizenship requirements and thus exclude non-Indians, which includes non-Indian freedmen. So why did the Freedman controversy arise? In 2006, the Cherokee Nation Supreme Court ruled that imprecise language in the Cherokee Nation's Constitution opened the door for citizenship to non-Indian freedmen descendants. Following that ruling, 2,867 descendants of freedmen were allowed to enroll as citizens, despite the fact they did not have an Indian ancestor in the federally authorized Dawes Rolls.
It is important to note the Cherokee Nation Supreme Court also acknowledged that the Cherokee people had the final word on citizenship and could amend their constitution to make it clear that citizenship will only be granted to those with Indian ancestry.
The Cherokee people followed the advice of their Supreme Court and took up a petition to hold a special election. A resounding 77% vote in March 2007 resulted in an amendment to the Cherokee Constitution, stating that citizenship in the Cherokee Nation is limited to those descendants of Indians listed on the federally authorized Dawes Rolls. As a result, these 2,867 individuals, who were only granted citizenship a year earlier, were once again considered non-citizens. 300 of these non-Indian freedmen descendants immediately challenged the March 2007 decision in tribal court. Consequently, all 2,867 were reinstated as Cherokee citizens, pending the outcome of litigation currently in both tribal and federal courts.
Some would have you believe the Cherokee Nation is turning its back on the freedmen. But the truth is, there are more than 1,500 descendants of freedmen, like myself and my family. who have been Cherokee citizens for decades. The difference is we're citizens because we have an Indian ancestor listed on the federally authorized Dawes rolls.
Some members of Congress have decided to punish the Cherokee people for their vote, introducing such bills as H.R. 2824, which would terminate the Cherokee Nation and eliminate vital funding for health, housing, and human services for thousands of needy Cherokees.
If Cherokee Nation lost its funding, my family would have a hard time dealing with the fact that I won't no longer have a job, and that if I don't have a job, then I'll lose my insurance for my daughter who is sick. She was diagnosed when she was 12 years old of a kidney disease that she has to see a specialist, and if they didn't help her, she probably wouldn't be with us today.
Okay, basically we provide food to needy families that qualify for the program. If Congress was to cut funding to our program, you know, there would be a devastating blow to a lot of people, like 140,000, you know, individuals that receive help a year.
If the funding were taken away from Cherokee Nation, I would be without a home, and I wouldn't receive any health care, and without a place to live and without somewhere to go when you're sick and health care, you know, then what do you have? You're left empty-handed.
Cherokee Nation has helped me and my family. What we had before was a small 2-bedroom trailer.
It's hard to live there because there's so many of us.
We asked Cherokee Nation for help, and so they did. And Michael's blind, and they gave him a handicap bathroom, and then the hallways are wider for him to maneuver.
Well, basically my whole family, which includes me, my husband, my 2 sons, we rely on Cherokee Nation health care. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with uterus cancer, and if it wasn't for the Indian health care, then I probably wouldn't be here today. My husband, about 4 years ago, he had a heart attack, and it's the same situation. If it wasn't for the Indian health care, I mean, I'd hate to even think what would have happened.
Much misinformation surrounds the Freedman controversy, but there are some very real facts.
Fact: the Cherokee Nation welcomes all Cherokees equally. Citizenship is colorblind and has nothing to do with race or physical appearance.
Fact: there are more than 1,500 descendants of freedmen who are Cherokee citizens today because, like me, they can find an Indian ancestor listed on the federally authorized Dawes rolls.
Fact: the 2,867 freedmen descendants that don't have an Indian ancestor on the Dawes rolls have been reinstated as Cherokee citizens pending the outcome of litigation in the tribal and federal courts.
The question of whether the Cherokee Nation should allow citizenship for those who lack proof of Indian ancestry will ultimately be resolved in the courts. H.R. 2824 and similar appropriations bills unnecessarily punish those who do not deserve punishment.
These members of Congress are trying to play judge, jury, and executioner of the Cherokee Nation, despite the fact that no court has found that we've broken the Treaty of 1866, despite the fact that we have the sovereign right to determine citizenship like every other Indian tribe in the United States, despite the fact that the matter is currently being heard in both tribal and federal courts.
We are simply asking Congress to respect the authority of the federal and tribal courts and allow the courts to continue the process of sorting out this complex legal matter.
If I could speak to Congress, I would tell them to please reconsider going forward with this bill, because the way I feel in my heart about it is the Native Americans have a lot of perseverance, and we have been put through so much. If this goes through, it'll be another round of trying to terminate us. There are thousands and thousands of lives in their hands.